Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, May 6th, 2022. Time for another show, and time for me to leave now. I wonder if I could get Darwin. Could you lengthen your segment today for about an hour or so? I need to go out and do some shopping real quick. I am reminded by Bill's morning tweet that not only, of course, is the Kagro in the Morning radio show live now. Nothing I can do about that. But the other part is the reminder that Mother's Day is this Sunday, which for some reason I thought was next Sunday, so I gotta go. I'll see you, everybody. I gotta go do some shopping, but, I guess I'll remind you at least of this much. Mother's Day on Sunday, so KagroX reminds you, buy many expensive presents for yourself because you've been such a great son or daughter to your mom. I suggest a car or yacht. Great idea. Yachts, by the way, probably on police seizure sale around the world. Mega yachts, super yachts that used to belong to, and probably still do, and probably will be returned in the end to Russian oligarchs. Why? I don't know. Rich people tend to get the things that they want and even get them returned to them when they're seized by police, but I don't know. Anyway, many things to reflect upon today, including the fact that I thought Mother's Day was next weekend for some reason. Okay. So, time to move on. Let's see. Many things happening today that are still capturing my attention via Twitter. So maybe a bit of a roundup show today, or maybe I should just turn off Twitter. That's the other possibility. Let's see. Many things in pocket and stowed away. Where to start? I don't know. Let's see. How about with this news? I felt like this was some exciting and interesting insight into our predicament in America, because democracy is so awesome. This is a great story from the Indianapolis Star, the Indy Star, as they call it online. Lebanon man, by which I imagine we mean Lebanon, Indiana, somewhere, as opposed to Lebanon, the country, or Lebanon, Pennsylvania, for that matter. Lebanon man accused of killing wife. ... I'll leave it off of there. He's accused of killing his wife, and it's terrible news. And even more terrible is what happens afterwards. I'm not going to give you the rest of the headline. Maybe you know it already. Sarah Nelson reporting for the Indianapolis Star. I'll rewrite as we go along so as not to spoil the fun surprise. This Lebanon man is accused of killing his wife in March, which is the worst month to kill your wife in. I think that it should come down on you even harder for doing that. I don't know why. And dumping her body in a creek, because why not, is a bad guy, and we don't like him. Except it turns out that we do like him. Somebody likes him. Andrew Wilhoit, I guess, Wilhoite. You need to know this, the spelling, at some point. Who is suspected of fatally striking his wife with a gallon-sized concrete flower pot. Did another thing just the other day, and if you don't know what it is, I won't spoil the surprise for you until later. The 40-year-old has been incarcerated in the Boone County Jail since March after police said he told investigators he threw a concrete flower pot at his wife, Nikki Wilhoit, the night before, and then dropped her body over the side of a bridge. Yeesh. Prosecutors charged Andrew Wilhoit with murder and his wife's killing. His next court hearing is scheduled for May 27th. And let's see, where else can I go with this? That's really the basics of the first part of the story. The second part of the story, however, is the truly exciting part. He is in jail for having killed his wife, but I think you probably, maybe you know already from being up and watching Twitter, but he has also won his Republican primary just the other day from jail, in jail, awaiting trial for the murder of his wife and dumping her body off the bridge. Family values, something, pro-life, yada, yada. He would have lost that thing if the correct spin had been put on it, if he had been accused of postnatally aborting his wife. That, I'm sure, would have stopped him dead in his tracks. But instead, his wife is dead in her tracks, and he is on track to possibly win election to the Clinton Township Board. Isn't that exciting? He's from Lebanon, but he's going to win a seat on the Clinton Township Board. But that's because that's the way it works in some of those Midwestern states. He's from the town of Lebanon, but the town is part of a township that includes like 5 towns or whatever. And I don't know how that stuff works. But do I research it? I mean, is it worth researching the political system that would nominate this guy? I don't know. Well, you can't blame all of Indiana for that. Well, that's just amazing, except to the extent that it is not amazing with today's Republicans. State election officials said it is legal for people facing felony charges, such as Andrew Wilhoit. That's an interesting way of putting it. I thought they were going to say, such as murder. But no, such as Andrew Wilhoit, to run for local office. A person is only ineligible if they are convicted. And you know how it is in this country. Innocent until proven guilty. In fact, basically, I think the way we should reformulate that. In this country, we believe that you are a Republican nominee until proven guilty. And then after that, you win the general election by saying something, they were going to make me defund the police, but I stopped it by murdering that person. Under our legal system, every person is innocent until proven guilty, or Republican until proven guilty. Brad King, co-director of the Indiana Election Division, said, if a candidate is ultimately convicted, is it easy then? No. Well then, depending on the timing of that conviction, that person can be replaced on the ballot by the political party that has a vacancy. All right. Township boards, by the way, consist of 3 members, state officials said. The local Republican primary race has only drawn the 3 candidates. That explains it. No one filed on the Democratic primary ticket, which basically, I guess, means that there's no Democrats nominated. And the 3 Republican nominees seeking one of the 3 seats, I guess, get swept into office at this point. I don't know. Boone County election results show Andrew Wilhoit earned 60 votes, just over 21%. To his competitors' 110 and 106 votes. Clinton Township has a population of 906, according to data from Stats Indiana. If a person facing felony charges is elected in a township race and they are convicted after being sworn in, King said the vacancy would be filled by someone affiliated with the political party of the last person to have the seat. So Republicans lose nothing by ditching the murderer, and they have not gotten around to that. But he's not a murderer per se. He's just a murder suspect. Well, golly. Where are they going to get the jury for this guy's trial? Now, I just realized 60 people out of the, well, how many voted? I'm going to have to do the math here. There's 906 people in town, but how many people voted? That seems like a pretty low turnout election. I don't know how many are eligible voters of the 906. But let's see. One guy got 110. That guy was a bank robber. I don't know. Somebody else got 106 votes. And let's just theorize that was a woman. And she is an international drug smuggler. And then the murderer got 60 votes. That's 276 votes that were cast. And so what did he get? So we know it's 21%. He got 60 of the, I just cleared it already. Who cares? 276 votes. What kind of turnout is that? Oh, well, we don't know how many people are eligible to vote, but 30% of the population turned out to vote anyway. And I'd be very curious to know how many of the 60 know he's in jail awaiting trial for the murder of his wife. And I guess the next logical question is, given that these guys are Republicans, I would look into this. I would like to audit this vote. It won't take nearly as long as it did in Arizona. There's only 276 ballots cast. I just want to check, because we're talking about Republicans here. Did Andrew Wilhoit by any chance fill out an absentee ballot in his wife's name and vote for himself? I just think we could put an hour into looking into it. There's 276 ballots. Please, is there some way we could do this? All right, well, let's see. There's a little bit more to this article in case we want to check into this stuff. Let's see. King, we're talking about, what was the name? Brian? Bob? Bradley King. Where's the guy's name? I forgot. I've lost her. Yeah, there we go. Bradley King says there's more. He further noted that there's no law prohibiting a person who's incarcerated before trial from, quote, exercising the duties of their office, unquote, should they get elected. How that practically gets executed will depend on the facts, King said. And of course, what if the guy is actually getting executed? How will they execute it then? That's a real problem. So you can win your seat in jail pre-trial, and then they would like bring you, I don't know, official papers in jail, and you sign them, and you become, well, how interesting. As for the investigation, there's a little bit of a blurb here. The Boone County Clerk's Office said election filings occurred at the beginning of January through the first week of February, before Andrew Wilhoit was taken into custody on his murder charge. And in fact, before he murdered her, right, doesn't he kill her in March? So he registers and signs on, and then, there's only 3 candidates, so ultimately he wins. But then, after I take care of my paperwork, I'm coming home to murder you, on his agenda, I guess. Nikki Wilhoit was reported missing March 25th after her friend noticed she didn't show up for work that day. Investigators in a probable cause affidavit said Andrew Wilhoit initially told police that he last saw his wife sleeping on the couch after the couple had an argument. When police spoke further with him, he asked for an attorney, which he can do. Police said Andrew Wilhoit called again shortly after and said he'd take them to his wife's body. So I guess the attorney did a good job there and talked him into doing the right thing once you've murdered somebody, which, I don't know. I guess there's points for that. This is incredible. But, only in the Republican Party does this seem to happen for some strange reason. Okay, well, I don't know. I just thought that was kind of bizarre and weird. There's more Madison Cawthorn news. That's good. I don't think he's naked in it at all in this round, but there's another problem on his plate that doesn't involve nudity or his cousin or any of those things that were involved in the previous ones. Madison Cawthorn may have a new ethics violation to handle. All the previous stuff was also ethics violations, but this is a new one. Representative Madison Cawthorn, we are told reliably enough by the Daily Beast's Roger Solenberger, has been embroiled in scandal after scandal, but just like in the last week or so. But this one, while much more traditionally Washington, that's cute, could still be a problem. And, it's got a long way to go, and just in terms of stacking up against the things he's found himself in trouble with in the last week. What do we have here? Overpaying a staff member. Hardly seems like Representative Madison Cawthorn's biggest scandal these days, but a Daily Beast investigation into Cawthorn's compensation for his chief of staff reveals a cut and dried ethics violation, one his office appears to have tried and failed to skirt. Congressional pay data shows that North Carolina Republican has paid his chief of staff, Blake Harp, fake name, $131,278 in 2021. That actually ranks Harp at the low end of the compensation for chiefs of staff in Congress. But why he was paid that specific amount could be highly relevant. House ethics rules stipulate that senior congressional staff can only earn $29,595 in outside income each year. According to filings with the Federal Election Commission, Cawthorn's campaign paid Harp a combined $73,237 in direct payments and payments to his LLC EMP strategies. EMP, huh? Okay. That outside limit, however, only applies to aides who qualify as senior staff. Cawthorn's office appears to have tried to avoid triggering that specific classification. The office's congressional expense reports show that Harp made about $1,500 less than the annual threshold that would qualify him as senior staff. But the ethics rules don't calculate senior pay at an annual rate. The pay rate is calculated per every 90-day period, and that's where they slipped up, paying Harp at a senior rate in the last quarter of 2021. Technical. Before quarter four, Q4, as they like to say, Harp's top quarterly pay was $32,499.99. But the office bumped that up to $34,499. So, $2,000 bumped up over the last 3 months of the year for a total of 92 days for a daily pay rate of $374.99. The daily rate for senior staff in 2021 was $363.16. And that, this is exciting, means Harp was actually senior staff in 2021. All right, this is kind of boring, actually, now that I think about it, but certainly compared to the other stories that he's embroiled in anyway. But okay, there you go. Unnecessarily detailed, I think, from that point on. Though it might be something to read in the background and see if you can catch other people out on similar grounds at some point in the future. All right, well, let's go to a revisitation of one of the stories we shared yesterday. Before we go over to, we're going to have to spend some time on the former guy having a less than glowing review in the latest Trump book to come out and be reported upon by Maggie Haberman, who totally knew all this stuff but didn't tell anybody. But Mark Esper's book is out and making accusations, some of which I feel like we did, in fact, hear at the time, like the one about, can't we shoot protesters, Black Lives Matter protesters that are outside the White House? Can't we just shoot them? Shoot them in the leg if you feel bad about it. Just shoot these guys. But there's still more. You will have seen the headlines by now, I'm sure. But maybe I thought we would browse through the article and comment on it along the way. But before we do that, because we've got about 10 minutes before the break, and that article will probably take us further than that, we revisit yesterday's story right at the end of the show about the settlement between the D.C. Attorney General and the Trump Organization and the Trump Inaugural Committee, which they settled for $750,000. And we commented at the time that we were reading it, it was being portrayed as, as a big victory, but a settlement is always a little less than you really want in those things. And as we pointed out, the accusation was that they stole or otherwise misappropriated $1.1 million. To pay $750,000 of that is not necessarily all that horrific an experience for the Trump Organization. And that's the spin that we get on it here from this MSN.com piece here. Is this attributed to, skimmed from one of the other publications? I don't know. Let's see. What are we looking at? Jose Pagliari. Oh, yeah. So from the Daily Beast. Okay. MSN has picked it up and rerun it here. Shattered. I don't know why shattered, but shattered, and that's in scare quotes, then colon, how the Trump family won the D.C. inauguration case. That's a different spin, because the Washington Post spin was, yes, it was a settlement, but Trump lost the case because he had to part with $750,000. Jose says, he won the case because he didn't have to part with what he actually stole. As the dust settles from the legal fight between the District of Columbia's Attorney General and the Trump family, it's becoming clear to government watchdogs and the case's star witness that the former president has once again gotten off easy. On Tuesday, D.C. Attorney General Karl Racine declared victory after the multi-billion-dollar Trump Organization and the former president's inauguration committee agreed to fork over $750,000 for their shady dealings in the run-up to Donald Trump's 2017 celebrations in the nation's capital. The deal ends his years-long investigation into the way Trump's family and company misused nonprofit funds to honor the incoming president instead enrich themselves. And there was no point in trying to honor this incoming president. There was nothing he had ever done that was worthy of honor. But okay. Anyway, but that's less, the $750K, less than the $1 million that the AG had accused the Trump family of misspending in nonprofit funds by booking events at the Trump International Hotel in Washington, D.C., and at vastly overpriced rates at that. More importantly, the Trump Organization and the 58th Presidential Inaugural Committee were allowed to maintain that they did absolutely nothing wrong. That's part of the settlement. Usually is, though. Defendants dispute these allegations on numerous grounds and deny having engaged in any wrongdoing or unlawful conduct, the proposed settlement reads. The announcement was severely disappointing news for Stephanie Winston Wolkoff. I don't always feel bad for her whenever she, complains about things. I mean, it's great that she's telling, hopefully, the truth on the Trumps now, belatedly, but while she was making money on it, she didn't have much to say. Anyway, the announcement was severely disappointing to her. Stephanie Winston Wolkoff, who helped plan the event and became a key government witness against the Trumps after news stories appeared to pin the blame for mismanagement of funds on her. That's what motivated her to speak out. I'm just so shattered. It's awful. It's unjust. It's absurd, she told the Daily Beast. I can't believe this. They stole so much. The self-dealing. I told you it was self-dealing. The perjury. They all know about it. Winston Wolkoff, who wrote a tell-all book about her time as First Lady, it says, this is an interesting typo, First Fady, F-A-D-Y. But we all know First Lady, Melania Trump's advisor. She lamented that Donald Trump had slithered away again. He is above the law. There's just no accountability whatsoever. For $750,000, she said. Elizabeth Hempowicz. Who's that? Elizabeth Hempowicz, Director of Public Policy at the Project on Government Oversight, described the settlement as, quote, the kind of thing that helps fuel this public perception that there are two systems of justice, one for the everyman and another for the rich and powerful. It's not about the money at the end of the day. What's $1 million to the Trump family? She said. I don't know. In reality, the money owed by the former president's inaugural committee, some $350,000, was actually already paid by an insurance company. Lee Blaylock, an attorney representing Trump's presidential inaugural committee, said in a statement that an insurer had already delivered its half of the penalty, and the nonprofit could officially wind down now that the litigation was over. As the settlement states, the Presidential Inaugural Committee continues to dispute all of the Attorney General's claims and remains confident that had this case gone to trial, the PIC would have prevailed based on the evidence, he said in a statement. There was even some dancing on the grave, per se. It would have required the PIC's insurer to spend double the amount of his insurance settlement just to try this case to verdict, and thus this modest settlement payment only makes common sense, he added. Presidential inaugurations are hastily put together celebrations that potentially fall prey to all the misgivings of a pay-for-play scheme. Yeah, we should probably change that at some point. They're organized by the incoming president's associates and quickly funnel millions of dollars from donors who could see this as an opportunity to call in future favors from the administration. The concerns were heightened with Trump, who held extravagant parties for his children at the hotel with their name on it, one that soon became the go-to spot for lobbyists seeking to curry favor with this administration. But the proposed settlement between the Trump entities and the D.C. Attorney General shows that an incoming president's family can use the opportunity to enrich itself with minimal consequences, Hempowicz told the Daily Beast. It certainly doesn't give us any bright-line rules that other inaugurations can operate under, she said. AG Carl Racine still declared victory, putting out a statement on Twitter that the district was, quote, resolving our lawsuit and sending the message that if you violate D.C. nonprofit law, no matter how powerful you are, you'll pay. But you'll pay 75 cents on the dollar or less. But what the local attorney general gave up in the deal is the ability to pursue the matter any further, meaning prosecutors may ignore how the Trump organization's then chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg, held a shadow job auditing the committee's finances. The Trump organization maintained that it had nothing to do with the case. It was merely a shell company with 0 employees and no relationship to the hotel, and that somehow its CFO managed to get looped in 3 months after the celebration to conduct an audit of the committee's finances. Investigators will also be ignoring how daughter of the twice impeached former president, Ivanka Trump, testified under oath that she, quote, really didn't have an involvement in the planning of the inauguration, even though emails surfaced at Mother Jones showing she closely scrutinized the event. D.C. law enforcement is also foregoing further exploration of how a firm pertaining to longtime Trump buddy Mark Burnett, who created The Apprentice, walked away with nearly $25 million in nonprofit funds for helping to broadcast the event, even though accounting records appeared to show fudged numbers. Accounting documents viewed by the Daily Beast show the committee's planners drafted at least 3 versions of a televised production budget with vastly varying costs for the same services that all curiously added up to almost exactly $25 million. So, basically, no matter how you slice it, Mark Burnett was guaranteed a $25 million take, whatever the budget says. However, Noah Bookbinder, president of the watchdog group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, said that any of the merited disappointment should be tempered with the grim reality that prosecutors face when targeting the rich and political powerhouses of the Trump family. Donald Trump and his associates have a strategy of aggressive litigation and particularly delay tactics. Well, we know all about that. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's wind up this Daily Beast article. There's a little bit more here, and I like to get every bit of how Donald Trump escapes liability for things. As we exited for the break, we were reading the quote from Noah Bookbinder from the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, pointing out what we have known for forever. Donald Trump and his associates have a strategy of aggressive litigation and particularly delay tactics. They will try to drag things out as long as possible. They will make it as difficult as possible. For the Attorney General to get them to a place where they were willing to pay up is pretty remarkable, he said. I wish it was more, and I wish it were all the money they got through self-dealing, Bookbinder told the Daily Beast. It is frustrating that Donald Trump always seems to escape without admitting anything. According to the pending deal, D.C. will receive the money and direct it equally to 2 youth development nonprofits, the Mikvah Challenge Grant Foundation and the D.C. Action for Children Today. The settlement isn't final yet, though. A local judge will still have to approve it and be convinced that the terms are fair and stand up to scrutiny. In fact, the Trump organization would have got out of this entirely if it were not for Judge Yvonne Williams, who inherited the case at the start of the year. Williams dragged the Trump organization back into the lawsuit as a defendant after the previous judge had inexplicably let it go on the theory that the New York-based company was outside his jurisdiction. The Trump loyalist who led the committee, billionaire Tom Barrack, is still dealing with his own legal problems. He was indicted last summer on charges that he abused his position in the president's circle of trust by engaging in foreign lobbying and obstructing justice. Meanwhile, the worst of Trump's present legal nightmare seems to be merely inching forward. A years-long criminal investigation by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office into his alleged business fraud seems to be falling apart now that the new DA, who inherited the case from his predecessor this year, has thus far blocked investigators attempting to seek a grand jury indictment, according to multiple inside sources and a leaked resignation letter. A parallel investigation by the New York Attorney General remains a civil matter that would not land him in prison, and what could be the most promising criminal investigation, the Fulton County District Attorney's probe of the infamous phone call where Trump pressured Georgia's top elections official into flipping the 2020 election results by materializing 11,780 MAGA votes out of thin air, is just getting started. Yes, okay, well, at least that is still going on. So, big grain of salt for yesterday's reporting in the Washington Post, no doubt driven largely by the narrative provided by the D.C. Attorney General's office. So, okay, that's of some interest. More reporting on various Trump legal problems. You'll recall that up in New York State, the civil case being pressed by the Attorney General there made some progress in getting a civil contempt ruling against him, charging Trump $10,000 a day so long as he, refused to produce certain documents. And, that sounds great because for the rest of us, $10,000 a day would be tremendous motivation. So far, I guess it hasn't been tremendous motivation for him. Don't know whether he thinks he'll ever have to pay that or just thinks that's the cost of doing business or what. But apparently he's challenged it along the way and it's come to nothing. HuffPost reports, thanks to Nina Golgowski, that Trump loses attempt to stall $10,000 a day fine for contempt of court. Fines continue mounting after the ex-president's failure to produce documents for the New York State Attorney General's investigation of his business practices. A New York judge has denied ex-President Donald Trump's request to halt $10,000 daily fines after he was held in contempt of court for failing to cooperate with the state attorney general's investigation into his business practices. The fines, reaching $90,000 as of Wednesday, which means it was around $100,000 yesterday and $110,000 today. I don't know whether they accrue at the end of the day or what. So we might be sitting at around $100K right now. Began mounting, these fines did, on April 26th after he defied a court order to produce documents sought by New York Attorney General Letitia James. James, a Democrat, in case that matters to you, is probing whether Trump misstated the value of his business assets, including skyscrapers and golf courses, on his financial statements for more than a decade. Trump appealed the contempt ruling and asked to put the fines on hold until his case is decided. A day later, Appellate Division Judge Tanya Kennedy denied that request and referred the case to a panel of appellate judges to consider later. Trump attorney Alina Habba insisted in a motion filed Monday that Trump and his representatives performed a thorough and comprehensive search for the requested documents and found nothing. She called the daily fine exorbitant and wholly unjustified. Habba did not immediately respond to HuffPost's request for comment. This was the second time that Trump has lost an attempt to duck the contempt order. New York Supreme Court Justice Arthur Engoron rejected Trump's arguments last month and set the daily fine for the missing the deadline for producing the documents. And in case that's confusing to you, I think we've mentioned a couple times in the past, because it comes up every once in a while, that in New York, the Supreme Court is not the same as it is everywhere else. The Supreme Court is, in fact, the trial level courts. It's the Supreme Courts of Justice, and when it comes to justice, they're totally supreme. And then the Court of Appeals is their is their top case court, akin to everyone else's state Supreme Courts. But for whatever reason, the Supreme Court, I know it's very confusing. It's upside down and backwards in New York. So it is not sufficient simply to attach a list of people who participated in the searches, the judge said of Trump's defiance. Engoron also noted that Trump's continued failure to produce the documents further prejudices the Attorney General as the statutes of limitations continue to run for offenses that may be involved in the investigation. And then at some point, I'm sure they will seek to, the Attorney General will seek to toll the statute, to put it on hold, and point out that through no fault of their own, the statute of limitations perhaps threatens the case because Trump is delaying, and you can't afford him the benefit of that delay by dismissing the case on statute of limitations grounds if the delay was caused by the defendant here. So, okay, of some interest, just something to keep an eye on, nothing major at this point. Let's see, other things that I wanted to share with you. Well, let's perhaps head over to the major story of the day, which is no doubt, sadly, the New York Times reporting on yet another book, and it's getting kind of tiresome that all this stuff gets revealed afterwards, and it's particularly the case when it's an administration official who's professing that they were shocked and appalled by things that happened while they were in office, but they nonetheless kept their mouths shut and then did the tell-all book thing later, even though they're not saying I did all these illegal things that I was asked to do and now I'm confessing them. They very often did their best or claim they did their best to prevent them from happening or to distract him from whatever crazy thing he was trying to do at the time so that it wouldn't have to get done. And maybe that's a good thing, but it's quite frustrating, all of these books, for one reason or another. This time, again, Mark Esper's book. Trump proposed, this is the headline from Haberman this summer, Trump proposed launching missiles into Mexico to, quote, destroy the drug labs, Esper says. It is one of the moments in his upcoming memoir that the former defense secretary described as leaving him all but speechless, except that he then did the exact opposite of speechlessness and went ahead and what did he do? He wrote a book that's not very speechless at all. So, I don't know. Somehow he profits from it. Maggie Haberman, I guess, is covering the story here. President Donald Trump in 2020 asked Mark Esper, his defense secretary, about the possibility of launching missiles into Mexico to, quote, destroy the drug labs and wipe out the cartels, maintaining that the United States' involvement in a strike against its southern neighbor could be kept secret, Mr. Esper recounts in his upcoming memoir. So, let's see. Buy Greenland, nuke hurricanes, launch missiles into Mexico. What else? I mean, of course, it was same book was making the accusation the other day. The first round of stories was, why can't we shoot the protesters outside the White House? Although I do feel like we heard that in real time, but maybe not. We're all pretending it's a new revelation, so we'll go along with it and say it's new. Those remarkable discussions were among several moments that Esper described in the book, A Sacred Oath, the name of his book, as leaving him all but speechless when he served the 45th president. And if the oath was that sacred to you, you would have placed him under house arrest and 25th Amendmented him right out of office, but whatever. Mr. Esper, the last Senate-confirmed defense secretary under Trump, and the only acting defense secretaries from that point on, also had concerns about speculation that the president might misuse the military around Election Day by, for instance, having soldiers seize ballot boxes. They tried very hard to get him to do that after the election, but this was something they feared around Election Day itself. He warned subordinates to be on alert for unusual calls from the White House in the lead up to the election. The book, to be published on Tuesday, offers a stunningly candid perspective from a former defense secretary, and it illuminates key episodes from the Trump presidency, including some that were unknown or underexplored. I felt like I was writing for history and for the American people, said Mr. Esper. That's not going to save you. I Wouldn't mind seeing you in the defendant's dock along with the rest of them, despite your having tried to whitewash your career this way. So I felt like I was writing for history and the American people. Thanks a lot," said Esper, who underwent the standard Pentagon security clearance process to check for classified information. He also sent his writing to more than 24 four-star generals, some cabinet members, and others to weigh in on accuracy and fairness. That's a lot of stars there, as a matter of fact. I don't know. I was just thinking in my head. 24 is 24. Are there 24? I mean, I guess there's a lot of four-star generals. And by the way, that's 96 stars between them. So, okay. More than 24 four-star generals. I don't bother with these three-star losers. Only four-star generals are reviewing my book. He learned a lot from Trump, I guess. All right, where do we leave off? Oh, yes. He had everything checked by four-star generals plus cabinet members, etc. Pressed on his view of Mr. Trump, Mr. Esper, who strained throughout the book to be fair, believe it or not, to the man who fired him while also calling out his increasingly erratic behavior after his first impeachment trial, ended in February of 2020. Oh, okay, after his first impeachment trial ended. Okay, I was like, where does this come in? So this is one of those phrases that's set off by M dashes here. So, pressed on his view of Mr. Trump, Mr. Esper, who strained throughout the book to be more fair to the man who fired him while also calling out his increasingly erratic behavior after his first impeachment trial ended in February of 2020, said carefully but bluntly, he is an unprincipled person who, given his self-interest, should not be in the position of public service. Fairly straightforward assessment, but years too late. So whatever. In the meantime, while you were Secretary of Defense, you kept your mouth shut and did what you were told for the most part, except for shooting protesters and launching missiles. Thank God you didn't do that, but I'm not super impressed. A spokesman for Trump did not immediately respond to a request for comment. No doubt never will. Later on, he's a loser and he's disgruntled, etc. But Mr. Esper describes an administration completely overtaken by concerns about Mr. Trump's re-election campaign, with every decision tethered to that objective. He writes that he could have resigned and weighed the idea several times, but that he believed the president was surrounded by so many yes men and people whispering dangerous ideas to him that a loyalist would have been put in Mr. Esper's place. The real act of service, he decided, was staying in his post to ensure that such things did not come to pass. And although I can understand that as an excuse, I don't know. I mean, to me, it's like, well, if I'm inevitably going to be fired for this, I will be fired being loud on the way out, not, silent and quietly fighting his policies, but saying, I've been sworn in and all, and so my duty is to the rest of you. This president is a crazy idiot and he should be impeached, should be removed from office immediately, and I'm willing to sign any 25th Amendment documents anyone wanted to bring forward. Please, let me know. You know where to find me. Sure, that would have hastened his firing and replacement with a yes man, but that would have been helpful on the record while he was still in office and while he was still subject to impeachment. Although he's still subject to impeachment, that's always true. They don't like doing things. So, anyway, where were we? Oh yes, right. The real act of service, he decided, was staying in his post to ensure that such things did not come to pass. One such idea emerged from Mr. Trump, who was unhappy about the constant flow of drugs across the southern border. He didn't get any of them. During the summer of 2020, Trump asked Esper at least twice if the military could, quote, shoot missiles into Mexico to destroy the drug labs. They don't have control of their own country, Mr. Esper recounts Mr. Trump saying. When Mr. Esper raised various objections, Trump said that we could just shoot some Patriot missiles and take out the labs quietly. That's so quiet, shooting missiles. And Patriot missiles, are those, I don't know, that brings to mind that, weren't they the anti-missile system more than anything else? Patriot missiles. I thought that they were, is that what we used like in the Iraq War? And gosh, I'm trying to remember exactly what we were using them for. Yeah, well, so, yeah. Okay, so they were anti-missile defense systems and maybe used for anti-aircraft defense. They're surface-to-air missiles. So, I mean, again, maybe we could shoot some missiles into Mexico. You could, of course, shoot missiles into Mexico. I mean, you shouldn't. Let's not endorse the idea. But they wouldn't be Patriot missiles, but those are the only missile names he remembered. Because Patriot, those are the best missiles, obviously. What sort of missiles might they be? I mean, what do we use? It would be like guided weapons and cruise missiles. The Tomahawk, probably, right? I don't know. I'm not like a big military expert, but Patriot, no. And as a matter of fact, let's see what Wikipedia has to say about that. The Mim-104 Patriot, if you want to use all the cool tactical language for it, is a surface-to-air missile system, primarily, the primary of its kind used by the United States Army and several allied nations. It is manufactured by Raytheon, isn't that great? Derives its name from the radar component of the weapon system, not just because they love patriotism, but because the, are you ready for more tactical language? The ANMPQ-53, whatever that is, at the heart of the system is known as the Phased Array Tracking Radar to Intercept on Target. That is the, as they call it, backronym. That's very cute. I like that. They basically decide what they want to call the thing, and then they jam the name together so they can spell out the acronym that they like. Patriot. Phased Array Tracking Radar. That part makes sense. To intercept on target, because you can't intercept something off target, right? The Patriot system replaced the Nike Hercules system as the U.S.'s primary high to medium air defense system and replaced the MIM-23 Hawk system as the U.S. Army's medium tactical air defense system, just so you know. But yes, the Patriot has been given the function of the U.S. Army's anti-ballistic missile system, which is now Patriot's primary mission. The system is expected to stay fielded until at least 2040, in case you were wondering when you would have to learn the name of a new system. Yes, Patriot systems have been sold to the Netherlands, Poland, Germany, we didn't forget Poland, Germany, Japan, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Taiwan, Greece, Spain, and the UAE, Qatar. Why do we have an and there? No, okay. The UAE, Qatar, Romania, and, here's the and, Sweden. Okay, South Korea purchased several second-hand Patriot systems from the Germans after North Korea test-launched ballistic missiles into the Sea of Japan in 2006. So, yes, wrong kind of missile, but they sound great because Patriot. So, there you have it. He's dumber than you ever thought possible, but that can't come as a surprise to you. So where were we? We could just shoot some Patriot missiles and take out the labs quietly, adding that no one would know it was us. By the way, if that plan were to come to fruition, right, like there's no way to identify a Patriot missile that has landed. It blows up and there's no evidence left. There's a big thing that says like U.S. Army on it and has a flag and all that stuff, but no one would know it was us. We'll paint a different flag on it. We'll put ISIS on it. Anyway, so this is what he had to say. No one would know it was us. Mr. Trump said he would just say that the United States had not conducted the strike, Mr. Esper recounts, writing that he would have thought it was a joke had he not been staring Mr. Trump in the face, which to me doesn't really help you decide whether or not it's a joke. Okay, in Mr. Esper's telling, Mr. Trump seemed more emboldened and more erratic after he was acquitted in his first impeachment trial, and why not? It was clear to him that he could do no wrong, or nothing he would be held accountable for anyway, in terms of impeachment. Esper writes that personnel choices reflected that reality as Trump tried to tighten his grip on the executive branch with demands of personal loyalty. Among Trump's desires was to put 10,000 active duty troops on the streets of Washington on June 1st, 2020, after large protests against police brutality erupted following the police killing of George Floyd. Trump asked Esper about the demonstrators. Can't you just shoot them? Mr. Esper describes one episode nearly a month earlier, during which Mr. Trump, whose re-election prospects were reshaped by his repeated bungling of the response to the coronavirus pandemic, behaved so erratically at a May 9th meeting about China with the Joint Chiefs of Staff that one officer grew alarmed. The unidentified officer confided to Mr. Esper months later that the meeting led him to research the 25th Amendment, under which the vice president and members of the cabinet can remove a president from office, to see what was required and under what circumstances it might be used. Mr. Esper writes that he never believed Mr. Trump's conduct rose to the level of needing to invoke the 25th Amendment, and that's where you're wrong. He also strains to give Mr. Trump credit where he thinks he deserves it. Nonetheless, Esper paints a portrait of someone not in control of his emotions or his thought process, if there even is one, throughout 2020. Esper singles out officials whom he considered erratic or dangerous influences on Mr. Trump, with the policy advisor Stephen Miller near the top of the list. He recounts that Miller proposed sending 250,000 troops, 250,000 troops, to the southern border, claiming that a large caravan of migrants was en route. The U.S. Armed Forces don't have 250,000 troops to send to the border for such nonsense, Esper writes that he responded. Not to mention, of course, the absolute moral horror that would embody, like the idea that people migrating to the United States because of, political oppression, starvation, climate disaster, anything, just the simple desire to improve their lives for themselves and their family, should be gunned down at the border. That's just more of the same. Why can't we just shoot them and launch missiles into their country? Because no one cares about their sovereignty. In October of 2019, after members of the National Security Team assembled in the Situation Room to watch a feed of the raid that killed Islamic State leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, Mr. Miller proposed securing Mr. al-Baghdadi's head, dipping it in pig's blood and parading it around to warn other terrorists, Mr. Esper writes. That would be a war crime, Mr. Esper shot back. Miller flatly denied the episode and called Mr. Esper, quote, a moron. He might not be wrong. I don't know. Mr. Esper also viewed Mark Meadows, Mr. Trump's final White House chief of staff, as a huge problem for the administration and the National Security Team in particular. Meadows often threw the president's name around when barking orders, but Esper makes clear that he often was not certain whether Mr. Meadows was communicating what Trump wanted or what Meadows wanted. He also writes about repeated clashes with Robert C. O'Brien, Mr. Trump's national security advisor in the final year, describing Mr. O'Brien as advocating a bellicose approach to Iran without considering the potential fallout, like actual fallout probably. Mr. O'Brien said he was surprised and disappointed by Mr. Esper's comments, and that's where we leave it for today. That's the end of the article, as a matter of fact. And let's see, top of the hour break coming up. We still have to get to Darwin's latest contribution, which, takes us in a slightly different direction. But it actually occurred to me during this piece, reading about the 250,000 troops that Stephen Miller wanted to put at the border, that we still do, of course, have those Texas National Guard troops at the border, and still terrible things are happening to them. I didn't mention on the show the other day, and I'm glad I didn't mention it right away because the story changed a little bit, so I would have had to revise it anyway, but now is a good time to remind you. Those troops are still there, and those troops are still dying for little or no reason, many of them by suicides, but there is word not that far back, what do I have here, from WFAA.com, I guess one of the local Texas radio stations or television stations, I'm not even sure which. Body of Texas Army National Guard soldier has been found, officials confirm. Not a suicide this time, thankfully, but a death nonetheless, and one will have to mourn the loss of this life here. But Specialist Bishop E. Evans It says here in the subheader, quote, selflessly attempted to help two migrants who appeared to be drowning as they illegally crossed the river, officials said. And, wow. I mean, despite having been deployed on the mission of keeping people out, here this soldier sees people, making the illegal crossing, but they are clearly in trouble. Their lives are in danger, and he puts himself in harm's way to try to save them. I don't know whether he succeeds in saving them, but he himself is killed in the line of duty, and in what interesting fashion, what noble fashion at that. So, I mean, speaks well of the people for all this time to have been deployed on the border for this nonsense mission, to still be able to rise above that and recognize their humanity in this and give their lives for that kind of purpose is really a remarkable commentary on the situation. And everybody ought to know the name of Specialist Bishop Evans and perhaps a little bit of his story before we break for the top of the hour. The body of Texas Army National Guard soldier has been found. This dated April 25th, so it's been sitting around a while. U.S. Representative Tony Gonzalez confirmed this news to KENS Channel 5 on Monday, way back at the end of April here. 22-year-old Specialist Evans went missing on Friday in Eagle Pass while attempting to rescue two migrants who appeared to be drowning. The Texas Rangers had been leading the search efforts, assisted by the Texas Department of Public Safety, Parks and Wildlife, and Border Patrol representatives. Search efforts continued throughout the weekend after the Texas Military Department notified the family Friday evening that he was missing. Evans reportedly jumped into the raging waters without a flotation device, the Texas Military Department said in an email Tuesday in response to inquiries from the Texas Tribune and the Military Times. The Military Times also says in the past month, at least 23 migrants have drowned in these waters, and rescues by Guard members patrolling the river are a regular occurrence. So in addition to being devastated by the loss of this member of the Guard, I guess honors for those who have succeeded in that mission. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. In case you were wondering, yes, even the terrible Governor Greg Abbott did acknowledge that this sacrifice demanded respect and did, in fact, direct that flags be lowered to half staff in Evans's honor. So he hasn't gone that far, right? There was some chance that in an effort to be particularly Trumpy, he might say, I don't care that this was somebody in the armed services, who I'm always yelling at others to respect. He was saving illegal immigrants, so screw that guy. Now, he could have gone that direction, but he didn't. I guess he didn't dare at this point in his career. But that keeps it a non-story for him. So I guess that's probably his chief concern in all of this. At any rate, yeah. Sorry that we didn't get to an earlier mention of that, but I'm glad that came to mind again so that we could at least take note of this particular act of heroism and I guess learn more about the other act, or the fact that there have been other acts of heroism that at least have succeeded and haven't cost any of the members of the Texas National Guard their lives. But apparently people are putting themselves in harm's way to save the migrants that they're supposedly there to stop. And I guess that's probably the best answer to these ideas that idiots like Trump and Stephen Miller have of putting troops on the border to kill migrants who come across. That when it's put in the hands, at least of these particular Texas National Guard members, they take their role rather more seriously than Trump or Miller would have them do. And that's something to honor and be proud of. Okay, maybe here then would be an excellent place to segue into the latest contribution. It's not related to the usual topic or the very frequent topic that Darwin addresses on military issues, but rather a return, as our as he likes to say, senior black correspondent for a very different story. And, well, let's see. Shall we set it up or just roll it? He does a fine job setting it up. And you've heard the background of these stories too. Investigations at some of our, internal investigations at some of our elite universities, those that have been around long enough to have this problem, of their participation in the slave trade or keeping slaves themselves, even though they were very often, and in this case with Harvard University, established in northern states that abolished slavery much sooner than we finally got around to convincing the southern states to do in their cases. But and I guess for a long time that association with northern states and northern sensibilities in the Civil War, I guess, probably shielded a lot of these institutions from having to look back. Well, of course we didn't participate in the slave trade after some certain point because northern states didn't have a slave trade after some certain point. Anyway, you get the idea. And I've seen items in the past of investigations at other institutions similarly situated. I think Georgetown University had an investigation of their own as well. And it's been really interesting because it brings up the question of what sort of responsibility they have to address the wrongdoing, though it's now hundreds of years in the past. But, Darwin addresses the issue straight ahead, as do the articles that he brings to bear. So let's roll it and we'll talk about it afterwards. Why spoil all the work that Darwin has done in presenting the story? And my suggestion to you is that we ought not to do that. Let's just press the button already.
Hello, David. What's
Hello.
up, everyone? Senior Black Correspondent Darwin Darko here. Today, reading about the Harvard report that was recently released. Reading from an NPR article. Harvard releases report detailing its ties to slavery, plans to issue reparations. All right, let's see what they've discovered here. Harvard University has released a report detailing the school's involvement in the U.S. slave trade. Including faculty and staff owning slaves and professors teaching racial eugenics. I mean, if you dig far enough in any of these old school institutions, you're probably going to do this. So a lot of these other ones probably don't want to shake loose those rugs and see what swept under the rug back in the day. But I digress. So in 2019, Harvard President Lawrence Bacow formed a committee that included representatives from all the schools on campus and asked them to uncover Harvard's ties to slavery. The committee's work should have a strong grounding in rigorous research and critical perspectives that will inform not only our understanding of facts, but also how we might address the ramifications of what we learn, he said at the time. The committee found that Harvard faculty and staff enslaved 70 people from the school's founding in 1636 to the banning of slavery in Massachusetts in 1783. Some of those who were enslaved lived on campus and were responsible for providing care for Howard's presidents, professors, and students. Additionally, the report discovered many of the university's donors profited directly from the slave trade in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. Some used labor from enslaved people in the Caribbean and the American South. Others obtained their wealth from selling goods to plantations. Donors in the textile industry sourced cotton that was grown by enslaved persons. During the first half of the 19th century, more than a third of the money donated or promised to Harvard by private individuals came from just 5 men who made their fortunes from slavery and slave-produced commodities, the report said. The university also heavily supported the study of eugenics, the concept of encouraging selective breeding for the purpose of purifying the human race. Dudley Allen Sargent, director of Harvard's Hemingway Gymnasium from 1879 to 1919, implemented a physical education program that involved intrusive physical examinations, anthropometric measurements, and photographing of unclothed Harvard and Radcliffe students, according to the study. The school has made a plan to administer some form of reparations. Now, before I continue here, what do I think reparations would look like? Let me think about that and see if it's up to snuff. Harvard outlined several next steps it said it would take in an attempt to atone for its involvement in the slave trade, including monetary reparations for Black and Indigenous students who are descendants of enslaved people in the U.S. Okay, that's a start. The profound harm caused by the university's entanglements with slavery and its legacies cannot be valued in monetary terms alone, the study said. Nevertheless, financial expenditures are a necessary predicate to and foundation for redress. Hold on now, this sounds like they're trying to get away from paying up the actual dollars. The Legacy of Slavery Fund will be kept in an endowment strategically invested to support implementing of these recommendations, the report said. Nah, bleep that. No endowment that you control and that you can dole out, as you feel might be your standard. No, find these people, pay them cash money and with interest that are the descendants of this practice. And then you also put money aside for the endowment, your own money. They continue. The Ivy League school also plans to further partner with historically Black colleges and universities through initiatives such as appointing visiting HBCU professors to Harvard for 1 year and subsidizing summer semester or year-long studies at Harvard for HBCU students. The school said it is working to identify Black and Indigenous students who are direct descendants of people enslaved in the U.S. We further recommend that in recognition of this lineage, the university engage with these descendants through dialogue, programming, information sharing, relationship building, and educational support, it said. The recommendations will be evaluated through annual reports, Harvard said. Man, screw your programming and information sharing. Show me the money. Show me the money. If I'm a descendant from one of these 70 people, then you got all that free labor. All of that helped you to establish yourself at that time when you were just a fledgling institution. Multiply it how many years later that you've been capitalizing off of that free labor. Pay what you owe. Pay these reparations. Find the family. Find the families. Pay them cash money, and still do the endowment thing. Pay them what they're owed, and you can still do right with these HBCUs and partner with them and do all these other things. It sounds like a way of just kind of like not really coming to full terms with your history. And this is why we need CRT. I'm Darren Darko. Thanks for listening.
That's a good point. Excellent point at the end in particular. I love the extra point about it. That's why we need CRT. And yes, that's true. And a good point here. It is odd, right? When you get these colleges and universities trying to, take stock of where they stood, and any institution that's been around long enough will have had some involvement in slavery. And it sounds like at the outset, anyway, the research was far-reaching enough that you probably would get more conservative observers out there to say, well, maybe it's an overreach to say, well, some of the people who donated money made their fortunes in the textile industry, where the textiles were made with cotton and grown by enslaved people. They didn't enslave the people. But, I guess the larger point here, and the reason it's relevant, and Darwin gets at it at the end there, is, well, if you made a fortune in textiles, I understand. Okay, you didn't own slaves, let's say, and you didn't own plantations. But part of the reason you made a fortune in textiles was that your cotton was cheaper because the plantation owners who sold it to you, or whatever, the commodities brokers who bought it from the plantation owners, et cetera, however many transactions you want to put in the way, the price stays low because you didn't have to pay the people who planted or harvested or processed the cotton. So with low-priced cotton, you were able to make a fortune in textiles. You might even been able to make a fortune in textiles with high-priced cotton, where everybody was paid a fair and living wage to raise the stuff, but your fortune would have been less. And of course, you would have had then less to give to Harvard. But Harvard benefited tremendously from the fact that you made such a fortune. And you made such a fortune because you benefited tremendously from the fact that they never paid the people who grew the the major input into the goods you sold. In addition, of course, I'm sure they got plenty of money from Southerners who attended Harvard. There were such people. There still are. And they were able to pay the tuition, let's say, because their families owned large and profitable plantations that operated on free labor. Or there were people who, whether they were Southern or Northern, up through, 1783 was it, that they abolished slavery in Massachusetts? And of course, even if they abolished slavery in Massachusetts in 1783, I don't know what the state of the law in Massachusetts was, but if you were a student from Georgia, a wealthy Georgia or South Carolina planter family who sent their kids up north to graduate from Harvard, they frequently would bring slaves with them and say, they remain my slaves even though we're in a free state, especially in maybe the early days like 1780s, right? Whatever. So they go on to get their Harvard education, and you know what it means to get a Harvard education. It certainly meant that maybe to an even greater extent back then. It was something that enabled you to retain your status and wealth and make even more money off of familial status and wealth, all thanks to having been served by enslaved people the whole time. Anyway, there's plenty of reasons to believe that a significant portion of Harvard's now fabulous wealth and endowment comes from the benefit of slavery. Even, and if you're not going to limit yourself to direct involvement, even donors from post-Civil War days very likely were wealthy enough to make those donations because they started with familial wealth that enabled them to go to Harvard, enabled them to rise to even higher levels of familial wealth based on having exploited enslaved people at some level in years past. So yes, there's an enormous chunk of the wealth of Harvard that is probably attributable to this. And over the course of 200 years, just the interest alone would have compounded the value of what they extracted from the enslaved people back then, even in relatively small numbers. Just the years alone would have multiplied that, not to mention what big donors to Harvard were able to do with exploiting that labor. So they have a very real claim to a lot more money probably than they're thinking. And Harvard administrators are probably thinking, well, let's be realistic. There's lots we're doing for other good things and other good causes and et cetera, and we can't bankrupt ourselves with this. But I understand that you're not, and it's very hard to make that decision. I don't think anybody could responsibly and stay in office, make that decision. But surely you can do it without bankrupting yourself. As Darwin suggests, that perhaps some of these activities in the endowment fund that would underwrite programs and bring students from HBCUs to Harvard for a semester or a year, or, God forbid you should actually admit them to Harvard for 4 years, but whatever. Some people probably were admitted to Harvard for 4 years and chose instead to get their education at an HBCU for personal reasons, or possibly because the size of the debt you'd have to rack up to make it through Harvard, although Harvard probably, they were certainly in a position to, and maybe even did. These days they do make fairly enormous scholarship grants to a student like that, a student who would be choosing between an HBCU and Harvard itself could probably see a large part of their tuition paid. But make it more obvious, let's say, or whatever. I like the idea of bringing people in, and of course then people who have made the choice to say, no, I'd prefer to graduate from an HBCU, but I wouldn't mind the additional credentials and prestige that comes from a scholarship for a year or so at Harvard. Good, take it. That sounds good. But yeah, cash reparations too. I know that seems like, for some people, hard to justify, but if you think about how Harvard got to be Harvard, and you're honest about it, you'll probably land on the same conclusion. So very interesting. As I said, I've heard other colleges and universities having to grapple with similar issues, and likewise coming to the conclusion that some relatively generous amount of money could be parted with, but not nearly, well, I guess sort of in a way like the Trump story, right? A settlement of $750,000 rather than repaying all the millions that you stole, even just the $1.1 million that we can prove, you get away with. And here, well, $750,000 is nothing to sneeze at. Well, at you. What are you going to do? I've just sneezed at it. All right. Well, at any rate, I thought that was a very interesting story. And so we'll share with you the print version of the NPR story that Darwin read for us there. And what do you know? Then you'll be caught up to date on this thing. Okay, let's see. Other stories to share with you today. Maybe I'll double back to the military angle one more time just to share a story that I didn't share earlier. That maybe we file under, I guess, under coronavirus issues. Navy, that's the United States Navy, opening an investigation after 7 deaths, on the USS George Washington. Okay, so it seems like a lot, but of course we're talking about an aircraft carrier. There's a lot of people on an aircraft carrier, and 7 deaths, though, does seem like, on a ship in peacetime, that would be an unusual number, so I guess they're checking it out. What's happening? The Navy is opening an investigation, or at least that's what they said back on April 25th when I put this story away, into the deaths of 7 sailors assigned to the aircraft carrier USS George Washington, who enslaved people, by the way, just throw that in there, including 3 who were found dead in 1 week. You'd think that would shake up command a little bit, right? Admiral Darrell Caudle, 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 is that right? Commander, U.S. Fleet Forces Command, commanded twice here in this thing, has directed Rear Admiral John Meyer, Commander, Naval Air Force Atlantic, to investigate and assess the reported deaths of sailors assigned to the USS George Washington, said another person, Captain Sarah Self-Kyler. That's an interesting hyphenated name, Self-Kyler. Well, I hardly ever Kyle anyone else. I'm a Self-Kyler. I'm sorry. Anyway, she's a spokesperson for the U.S. Fleet Forces Command, and she gave this statement to The Hill, where I'm reading this from. Jordan Williams, the author of the piece, by the way. The investigation will include correlations, command climate, and culture issues, and the systemic relations between them. Caudle asked his staff to work with Naval Air Force Atlantic, the ship, and other Navy stakeholders to, quote, better understand and assess the efficacy of the existing total sailor fitness programs, Self-Kyler said. 7 deaths have been reported on the George Washington over the past year. Lieutenant Commander Robert Myers, a spokesperson for Naval Air Forces Atlantic, told The Hill in a statement. A lot of spokespeople working here. 4 of those deaths were reported last year, and the other 3 were reported this month when 3 sailors were found dead within a week of each other. 1 sailor was found unresponsive on April 15th on board the ship, and the 2 other sailors had been found at locations off base on April 9th and 10th. Of the 7 deaths, 1 has been confirmed as suicide, and 3 other apparent suicides are under investigation. Another death was attributed to post-COVID-19 complications, while another was determined to be health-related, whatever that means. The cause of the 7th death is undetermined. So definitely some strange things going on here. Seems like an inordinate number of suicides. And, of course, no stranger to COVID is the Navy. You may recall, how long ago were we talking about the USS Theodore Roosevelt having to quarantine in Guam, was it? And then spreading COVID all over Guam. The circumstances surrounding these incidents vary, and it is premature to make assumptions as some incidents remain under investigation, Myers said. The death of any sailor is 1 too many, and of course 7 would be 7 too many, and we will thoroughly investigate these incidents to ensure we are providing the appropriate support and resources to sailors at sea and in the shipyards. It's interesting. Just thought I would note it along with all the other stories. Sometimes we lose track of how frequently service members died during the course of their service, but not related to combat. It's a risky endeavor, signing up. But, whenever you give over your whole life to anything, the chances of your dying in the course of it increase because, you've given your whole life over to it. Anyway, let's see. Moving on from that, just wanted to sort of note that for the record. A couple other things in the hodgepodge we have to offer you today. I happened to see just before airtime today, Tegan Goddard's Political Wire reporting the story that AP was covering, that down in Brazil, President Jair Bolsonaro has apparently, according to the Political Wire's headline on it, is busy laying the groundwork to challenge an upcoming election. Gee whiz, where did he get the idea that beforehand you should sow doubt about the integrity of the elections system in case you should lose? Running a Trump playbook down here. Let's see, how long is the AP story on this thing? Or should we just stick with the blurb from the Political Wire? No, not too long. Let's see what's going on down there and see if there's any other similarities. Brazil's Bolsonaro says he will seek audit of the voting system. Now, this is ahead of the election, which is kind of an interesting twist. Mauricio Savarese, reporting for the AP, lets us know the following. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro said Thursday that his political party will seek, the political party, not the government, but his political party will seek to audit the electronic voting system before the upcoming election amid concerns that he is actively sowing distrust in its eventual results. As allowed by electoral law, we will hire a company to do the audit, Bolsonaro said during a live broadcast on his social media channels. People want transparent elections in which the vote is effectively counted for their candidate. The far-right leader, who trails leftist former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva in early polls for months, has questioned the reliability of the voting system, though he has never provided any evidence. And why would you bother? Critics and analysts have raised concern Bolsonaro is laying the groundwork to contest October's election results should he lose. And aren't we talking about the leftist former president that he trails was impeached at some point, although under controversial circumstances, as I recall. But I wasn't, and still am not really, following Brazilian politics. Bolsonaro also said in his broadcast that the armed forces have given 9 suggestions to Brazil's electoral court to improve the system, but haven't yet received any response. I don't know how unusual that would be in Brazilian politics, but it would strike us as odd here in the United States. Initially, they, the armed forces that is, raised hundreds of vulnerabilities to go through this with a fine-toothed comb. It has been a long time. If electronic ballots are impregnable, why are they, the electoral court, worried? The president said. The head of the electoral court should thank them, take the necessary measures, discuss with the team of the armed forces so the elections are held without any suspicion. I think our translation may be a little wonky there. He added, the armed forces will not perform the role of just rubber stamping the electoral process or take part as spectators. Well, that would, again, strike us as very odd here in the United States. Maybe not so much in Brazil, but maybe alarming. I don't know. Brazilians, what do you think? During the broadcast, General Augusto Heleno, one of Bolsonaro's top advisors, denied a report published earlier Thursday from news agency Reuters, claiming the director of the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency told senior Brazilian officials last year that Bolsonaro should stop casting doubt on his country's voting system. U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price, speaking to reporters in Washington, said he wouldn't comment on anything CIA Director Bill Burns may have said to Bolsonaro or others. It's important that Brazilians, as they look forward to their elections later this year, have confidence in their electoral system and that Brazil once again is in a position to demonstrate to the world through these elections the enduring strength of Brazil's democracy. Well, I should hope so. Good luck with that. Also on Thursday, the day after the voter registration deadline, and this is a current article, so I guess we're talking about yesterday. Let's see. Brazil's electoral authority said more than 2 million Brazilians, say that 10 times, 2 million Brazilians, actually not so bad, aged 18 or younger joined the rolls this year. In Brazil, voting is mandatory for anyone aged between 18 and 70, and failure to vote entails paying a small fine. Those 16 and 17 can vote, but aren't obligated to do so. Interesting. In the 2018 presidential election, nearly 116 million voters out of the 147 million people registered turned up at the voting stations. Good show there in Brazil. All right, that's actually almost at the end here, but we got to run.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We're pretty much done, really, with that AP article. There was an interesting tidbit at the end. I mean, we can return to it just to share this. You may recall that they had done a great job turning out their voters. 116 million voters out of the 147 million people registered. And Brazil's electoral authority has said it has received a record number of registration requests this year. The number of young voters registering to vote between January and April rose 47% compared with the same period before the 2018 election, that it said in the statement. And then the surge, it says, came after local celebrities like singer Anitta, plus Hollywood stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Mark Ruffalo. Is that right? Does he pronounce his name that way? I've never asked him that. But Mark and Leo, I know them both so well, right? Made a final push for registration amid nationwide Get Out the Vote campaign. So that's exciting. Nice of them to do. And I don't know whether they got paid for it or not, but whatever. It doesn't really make a difference to me. And I'm glad that they did it and sound like it worked. So an eye on Brazil's upcoming elections then. All right, let's see. Whoops. It looks like... Yeah, I guess the Political Wire joining the list of publications that, however they structure their things, when you click on them through Pocket, it switches you over to them instead of opening it in a separate window. I think I should just use the keyboard buttons to make sure that happens regularly. Okay, let's see. Other things to get to. This is sort of a random direction. But I thought you might be interested in this tweet thread from Jeff Charlotte, who had been giving some thought, as many people on Twitter are, to the possible outcomes and the possible futures resulting from the possible issuance of the opinion in the abortion case that might just actually, like threatens to do, overturn Roe v. Wade. And Jeff had these speculations to share, some of which ring truer than others, or maybe inspire different. I don't know. To me, Not all of them seem as likely to come to fruition as others, but some of them, all of them are scary. And I guess you want to keep an eye out. So because it would be irresponsible not to speculate, we dive into his thoughts on this. Much bigger political violence and maybe some form of civil war, he says, seems possible or likely now. I hadn't really gone that far with it, but it's certainly possible. Overturning Roe won't be the cause, but the spark for a conflict many, mostly on the right, have been longing for. Consider some scenarios he invites us to do, and we're suckers for it. We'll take the bait and take the invitation. What about this? I don't know. I guess some thought has been given to this. The idea, because some states, of course, will be taking the invitation of overturning Roe to impose their own new abortion restrictions or reenact, not reenact like a Civil War battle, but reinvigorate, perhaps, revivify, to use some term I learned in law school along the way in torts at some point. Anyway, to revivify, that's an ancient term, statutes that have been on the books since before Roe, which has sort of, many states left them laying dormant. In case Roe were ever reversed, they would be prepared to put their laws back into effect immediately. So how do you respond to things like that? Especially the idea of some states might, neighboring states might have very different rules about abortion, or it might become that there are abortion deserts, I suppose, in certain states where every state for miles in either direction have strict prohibitions on abortion, and women seeking abortion will have to travel great distances to get them. One possible solution, I guess somebody's been throwing around, a mobile undercover abortion unit. I've never really heard it described this way, but I imagine that it's easy to imagine somebody coming up with such a thing. A mobile undercover abortion unit. See, who are we talking about? He's got a link to Jessica Bruder on Twitter, who apparently reports on such ideas. See, let me get the name again. Jessica Bruder's essential reporting in The Atlantic on this subject, the mobile undercover abortion. It might be in existence already, I guess, is what this implies. But let's see. A mobile undercover abortion unit from Illinois. This is a speculation here. Like, what if this were to happen? I mean, these are some interesting thoughts. Like, if you're wondering, how do you get to civil war from this? Not just activist on activist violence or whatever. But suppose that a mobile undercover abortion unit from Illinois would be stopped by police in Louisiana. All on board, of course, are charged with homicide. Illinois demands their return. What next? Right? It's a good question. Or worse yet, let's say that mobile undercover abortion van gets torched in, say, Mississippi, and the providers killed. And it emerges that local law enforcement knew and stood by. What next? How could that happen in Mississippi, right? Gee whiz. What about a young woman traveling from Texas to New Mexico for an abortion? Her father, simmering with violence, follows and tries to take her home by force. New Mexico says, hell no. And Texas says, what exactly? What would they do? Or a Missouri court convicts an underground abortion provider who flees to Illinois. Illinois apprehends this person and, despite massive public outcry, returns the provider to Missouri for sentencing. What next? Or flip the script. Imagine it from the perspective of the other side. Florida. A Florida man pursues his wife to Massachusetts, where she's gone for an abortion. He's arrested for attempted kidnapping. Outraged Floridians demand his freedom. What next? Or think beyond state lines. We know many big city DAs will refuse to prosecute abortions. Now comes a right-wing governor eager to make a national name with a state National Guard unit at his disposal. what next? The tangle of laws coming post-Roe is so dense, he concludes, that there are thousands of scenarios like this, all practically sparking, I guess maybe sparkling even, with the potential for political violence or escalating standoffs between states and various armed factions, official and otherwise. It's, I guess, quite possible. Certainly I could easily see tensions between activists in two states where people are arrested where something is illegal, but having originated in a state where it's not, or vice versa, and having activists in both states calling for extradition or calling for a denial of extradition so that you can keep this person under this jurisdiction for that reason, etc., etc. Certainly escalates it easily into state against state. Whether that erupts in violence, in the modern context is sometimes, it'll be difficult to predict because some people are just looking for any excuse. So even though it wouldn't make any sense to the rest of us to escalate these things to violence, that doesn't mean that someone else won't. And then, the repercussions of that, well, who knows? Okay, let's see. I'm going to scroll a little bit further back down here to see what other stories have been waiting in the wings to be added to our Friday catch-up mix here. Let's see. Well, I feel like we've covered the McCarthy tapes story quite a bit already, although I think I put aside this story was sort of a later stage story from the Washington Post. Did we feel like we got to this one? Facing House GOP, McCarthy defends himself after audio reveals he blamed Trump for the January 6th attack. I don't know if we got to that stage of the story. Well, let's see. I can perhaps remind myself by reading a little bit of it. Felicia Sonmez, Mike DeBonis, Jacqueline Alemany, and Leanne Caldwell, I hope I haven't mangled the names too badly, got the byline for this April 27th story. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy defended himself that Wednesday in his first face-to-face encounter with House Republicans after audio recordings revealed that he had blamed then-President Donald Trump for the January 6th attacks on the Capitol by a pro-Trump mob, voiced alarm about fellow GOP lawmakers, and pledged to urge Trump to resign. McCarthy's line of argument that he was merely engaging in a conversation of scenarios about Trump, what does that even mean, papered over the sharp concerns he had shared about the former president and several fellow House Republicans in a phone call with other GOP leaders in January of 2021. But it was one that many in the House Republican Conference appeared willing to accept Wednesday in their first meeting since the New York Times first reported the audio last week. The stakes are high for McCarthy, who seeks to become Speaker of the House if Republicans retake the chamber in November. So far, Trump has been willing to accept McCarthy's explanations. The GOP leader called the former president after the first audio recording surfaced on Thursday, and as long as McCarthy has Trump's backing, the House GOP will probably not abandon him. All of us were trying to make some sense of, what happened? Why did it happen? Why didn't we stop it? We were all trying to wade through that as the dust was settling, and then the dust settled, and I think he came to the right conclusions. Representative Jody Arrington of Texas said of McCarthy after Wednesday's meeting, "That is a snapshot of someone that was just trying to wade through something that was a serious thing and just trying to make sense of it," Arrington added. But I can tell you this, every member had a similar process, whether they were recorded or not. Several House Republicans, including Trump allies Andy Biggs and Matt Gaetz, had publicly criticized McCarthy on Tuesday. Biggs, a former chairman of the conservative House Freedom Caucus, said McCarthy's actions were incredibly undermining and had created a huge trust issue for me. Gaetz, one of several House Republicans about whom McCarthy and House Minority Whip Steve Scalise voiced concerns during that phone call in January of 21, lashed out at the leaders this past week. "This is the behavior of weak men, not leaders," Gaetz said in a statement Tuesday night. During Wednesday's House Republican Conference meeting, McCarthy stood up, explained himself, and delivered a speech about winning back the House majority in November. according to several attendees. He was greeted with a standing ovation, the attendees said. Two House Republicans said Gaetz was the only lawmaker to criticize McCarthy during the meeting, according to one of the lawmakers, Representative Don Bacon. Gaetz, quote, spoke up and he was angry. You can ask Matt Gaetz what he said. In a report Tuesday night, the New York Times detailed McCarthy's comments to fellow Republican leaders about several members of the House GOP conference days after the January 6th attack. The actions of Gaetz and Mo Brooks in particular had crossed a line, McCarthy suggested, noting that Brooks used incendiary language during a January 6th speech and that Gaetz had singled out Representative Liz Cheney for criticism in television appearances. He's putting people in jeopardy, McCarthy said of Gaetz, according to the Times. On the same call, Scalise suggested Gaetz's actions were potentially illegal, according to the report. After Wednesday's meeting, Gaetz pushed back against reports that Scalise said Gaetz had threatened a Cheney staffer last year, calling the allegation spin to cover a lie. Representative Marjorie Trader Greene, who was removed from her committee assignments over her extremist remarks, also stood up during the meeting and asked Scalise to apologize for the remarks he made on the phone call, according to two House Republicans who were present. During the January 10th, 2021 phone call, McCarthy and House GOP leaders also voiced concerns about the actions of other House Republicans, including Lauren Boebert, Barry Moore of Alabama, and Louis Gohmert of Texas, of course, according to the Times report. The Times first reported last week on the call, this would be about 2 weeks ago now, during which McCarthy said of Trump, I've had it with this guy. When he did is unacceptable. Nobody can defend that. Nobody should defend it. On the recording, McCarthy can also be heard telling House Republicans that he planned to tell Trump that it would be my recommendation that you resign. McCarthy initially denied the Times reports about the remarks, calling it totally false and wrong. After the Times released the audio of the phone call, McCarthy told reporters that he never thought that Trump should resign. He has since dodged questions on the topic. On Monday, McCarthy claimed the Times had asked him whether he had urged Trump to resign. The newspaper made no such assertion in its story. On Tuesday night at the Capitol, reporters asked McCarthy why he hadn't taken action to punish the lawmakers he mentioned on the phone call, and about criticism from Representative Steve Womack of Arkansas that McCarthy had failed to show leadership. No reply from McCarthy. Finally, when asked whether he was concerned any of this would hurt his chances of potentially becoming Speaker, he gave a one-word answer, nope. Many of the House Republicans who attended Wednesday morning's meeting said they stood by McCarthy and that the party was united in keeping its focus on winning in November and not on intra-party battles. At this point, we're seeing most of the members standing behind the leadership, Representative Robert Aderholt of Alabama said. He added of McCarthy, I support him for Speaker. He's done a good job in trying to work this conference to get it where it is today. Representative Brian Babin of Texas sought to put the focus back on Democrats and said Republicans are not going to be divided by rhetoric that's coming from the opposite side of the aisle. I think that there's so many other important crises we need to be stressing. Also, the American people want to hear answers. Why is their gasoline so high? Or why are you high from sniffing the gasoline, I would ask. Representative Glenn Grothman, a lot of backbenchers here from Wisconsin, this one, said he is absolutely comfortable with the possibility of a McCarthy speakership. He said he did not listen to the audio. I didn't listen to it. And you know why? Because unless you're a member of the press, nobody gives a damn about January 6th. Wow. Grothman said, nobody cares. Can you imagine? Well, you don't have to. It's real. Once again, Glenn Grothman, Republican of Wisconsin, nobody cares about January 6th. That's what he says. Some Republicans, however, said they are withholding judgment on McCarthy and suggested that they will not make a decision on the House GOP leadership race until after the November elections. At the time that we have the decision to make on who to vote for various leadership positions, I will make that decision based on my assessment of them in my first 2 years and who are the candidates for those positions, said Representative Bob Good of Virginia, freshman lawmaker who is a member of the conservative House Freedom Caucus, blah, 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 something, something. So he said it on Wednesday. Doom, done, bang, we're out. Interesting to contrast with something that I don't have articles put aside on, but that I know has been getting a lot of discussion this morning. Let's see if it traces back to any published articles that we can share with you, but lots of discussion about it. Yeah, okay, here's, I guess, the thread that'll bring us back to it. I happened to see Jamelle Bouie talking about this morning, retweeting the tweet of Scott Wong, NBC News congressional reporter. Scott tweeting here this thread and connection to his article. So good. Yes, we have something published on it. Scott begins with the headline here. It's a quote. "We should not defund," unquote. And then goes on to say, in a new letter to Speaker Pelosi obtained by NBC News, nearly 20 House Democrats, many vulnerable, called for a vote on legislation to boost police funding. To continue with the thread here, as opposed to reading the article, "Cutting to the bone only weakens any profession and fuels a race to the bottom. That's especially true in law enforcement," they wrote, quoting his own article here. "To make our communities safer, build a future with less crime, and save lives, we should not defund. Instead, we must invest to protect." The letter is the latest sign that Democrats fighting to preserve their fragile majority this fall are concerned about rising crime and the defund the police messaging from progressives, which isn't happening, that contributed to the party's loss of more than a dozen House seats, they say, in 2020. The Fund the Police letter is spearheaded by the Problem Solvers Caucus, their leader, Representative Josh Gottheimer, and also Representative Cindy Axne. Others targeted Ds who signed on are, let's see, gonna scroll over them so we can get their full names. Chrissy Houlihan, Andy Kim from New Jersey, Dean Phillips. Not all of them make their state obvious in their Twitter profiles, but we probably recognize a lot of them. Alyssa Slotkin from Michigan, Representative Susie Lee from Nevada, Marky Sherrill from New Jersey, Kim Schreier from Washington, and Chris Pappas of New Hampshire. And you can read the Fund the Police letter in Scott Wong's tweet in which he's embedded it, or you can read the NBC News article. I believe, is it his article? Yes, it is, that he attached to the first tweet of the thread. More to the point, though, I think at this point I'll jump back to Jamelle Bouie's comment on it. Oh, dang. Well, I didn't do it the way I wanted it, but let me run back. And I'm trying to keep the extra tabs open here so that we don't miss anything, but maybe I'll just pocket this one and then jump back to Jamelle, who was making, I thought, the very good point of saying, lost it and got to scroll for it again. Oh, it's here somewhere. Come on. I jumped back to the screen where it was and it reset me to the top. Here we are. Jamelle saying it's absolutely wild to watch these Democrats do everything they can to lodge defund, the word defund, into the minds of voters while complaining that voters associate them with defund. The call is coming from inside the House, my dudes, and I think I see a lot of people basically agreeing, saying, look, the only people talking about defund the police 2 years later are Democrats wringing their hands over what happened last time, which they're not even sure they can actually prove, but is an article of faith to them. True. But why keep bringing it up? It's not actually top of mind for anybody who's actually somebody we need to be concerned about. It's, there's unpersuadables who remember it and Republicans who will bring it up, but you don't have to defend defund by raising the funding. The funding, first of all, leaving it at current levels will be fine to defend you against defunding to the extent that logic matters, because you won't have voted to defund. But why increase? Especially when it's been pretty well demonstrated. Like economists will tell you, police have kind of done the maximum they're ever going to do with the level of funding that they've got. You don't decrease crime by increasing funding for police departments. It doesn't really work on a one-to-one basis. And there are other ways that you can attack, of course, base levels of crime. Some of those are social engineering and CRT or whatever. So we're not going to do any of those. Anyway, seems like garbage, but certainly seems like terrible strategy to do so much work at running around saying defund, defund, defund. Well, what I'm saying is don't defund. Yeah, well, guess which word is going to stick with people? It's pretty easy to see. So, how can I tell you? Get with the program here. Understand what's going on. And stop saying the word if it worries you so much. All right, let's see. Just a few minutes left here. Perhaps we can dive back into Pocket and scroll even further back and see if we can't bring some other interesting things forward here. Let's see. Oh, I forgot to get around to, I mentioned the other day that Madison Cawthorn also had some trouble with a financial scandal of some kind. And I think I didn't bother discussing it because it was reported by the Washington Examiner, which, I didn't really want to give any time to. But just so you're up to speed on that, I mentioned that it had something to do with a cyber, what was it, or a cryptocurrency. Madison Cawthorn, it says here, according to the Washington Examiner, Andrew Kerr, investigative reporter there, implicated in potential insider trading scheme, experts say. Just to give you a flavor for that, Madison Cawthorn may have violated federal insider trading laws that as he hyped up an alleged pump and dump cryptocurrency scheme, multiple watchdog groups told the Washington Examiner. On December 29th, the beleaguered North Carolina congressman posed at a party with James Koutoulas, I guess Koutoulas, a hedge fund manager and the ringleader of the Let's Go Brandon cryptocurrency. Of course, it had to be that. A meme coin set up in the wake of the chant mocking President Joe Biden. LGB legends. Tomorrow we go to the moon, Cawthorn, who has stated publicly he owns the cryptocurrency, posted on Instagram in response to the picture posted on Koutoulas' Instagram page. The next day, LGB Coin did exactly as the lawmaker predicted. NASCAR driver Brandon Brown announced on December 30th that the meme coin would be the primary sponsor of his 2022 season, causing LGB Coin's value to spike by 75%. Brown's statement featured comments from Koutoulas, who was pictured with Cawthorn just a few hours prior. Multiple watchdog groups told the Washington Examiner that Cawthorn's December 29th Instagram post suggests the lawmaker may have had advanced non-public knowledge of LGB Coin's deal with Brown. The watchdog said in the post, combined with Cawthorn's statement that he owns LGB Coin, warrants an investigation from the Department of Justice and the SEC to determine whether the lawmaker violated federal insider trading laws. Well, maybe not exactly the worst thing he's done, but a pretty bad one, and just generally an indication that the guy just doesn't know what the F he's doing at all, and it looks pretty clear that his conference just wants him bounced. They're sick of the guy, and they can't wait to get rid of him, and they're leaking everything they can to get rid of him. All right, let's see. This I thought was interesting and maybe something we can cram in just before exiting for a Friday. Seth Kotlar, I don't know whether that's the pronunciation, Cotlar, you may know him on Twitter, tweets under his own name, teaches U.S. history at Willamette University, which I now know how to pronounce, and he tweeted around, in late April, the 27th, this interesting thread. In 1981, he begins. He's looking way back. Oregon Republican Senator Mark Hatfield, a moderate, warned of the danger that the rising new right posed to the nation. 1981, that's quite early. There were 3 specific issues he highlighted that might sound familiar. And here a screen grab of the column, which ran under the header of Mark's Notebook, and then the headline on the piece, Misconceptions About New Right Thinking. Let's just grab what we can before exiting here. Seth picks out first was hyper-nationalism. Loyalty to the nation becomes equated with loyalty to the political agenda of the right wing, is Hatfield's quote. To take a different side on any of the issues means you are against the nation, that you are unpatriotic. Second was the manipulation of religion to convey the idea that if we embrace the political dogma of the right, we will be turning to God's true purpose for the nation. A national religious and political chauvinism is then promulgated. And of course, you know, the Proud Boys actually happily use that term, Western chauvinism. Third, threats of racism lie directly below the surface of the new right's ideology. From the earliest days of the Republic, there has been prejudice against foreigners, against blacks, against Jews. These sentiments continue to be subtly seized upon and inflamed by extremists. It really does sound quite familiar. And those are all direct quotes taken from the article. It's not that long. You can read the whole thing either in that first screen grab, if you can open it and then magnify it, or read various key passages also screen grabbed helpfully by Seth and embedded in the tweet thread. But yeah, quite remarkable how early on Hatfield nailed exactly what was going to end up happening in 1981, really. But Oregon probably had early indications of it with their militia movement out there. Some of the Pacific Northwest, a little bit in advance of all of this from spreading to the rest of the country. So they got an early look at it, and thanks to Senator Hatfield for pointing that out. Okay, time now to send to the microphone Justice Putnam with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, bringing his own Pacific Northwest view of these things. He, too, an early identifier of these problems. So stay tuned.
From netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, on the menu this morning, the Biden administration announced a wide-ranging enforcement strategy to hold industrial polluters accountable for damage done to poor and minority communities. The condition of some prominent U.S. dams is kept secret in the national database. Damn, that sounds strange, too. Stay tuned for more data on that. We'll see you next week.